I did my experiments that involved showing people simulated crimes and accidents and asking them questions about what they remember. In one study, we showed people a simulated accident, and we asked people how fast were the cars going when they hit each other. And we asked other people how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other. And if we asked the leading smash question, the witnesses told us the cars were going faster. And moreover, that leading smashed question caused people to be more likely to tell us that they saw broken glass in the accident scene when there wasn't any broken glass at all.
As some of you may know, self-organization is a mathematical term. It comes from the mathematical study of systems, specifically complex systems. And you know that complex systems, which are open to influences from outside themselves, capable of being chaotic, and non-linear, meaning small inputs lead to large and difficult to predict results, lead to an emergent set of properties. It just arises. You don't need to program it. And one of those properties is called self-organization. And amazingly, you can look at the mind as an embodied and relational emergent self-organizing process and understand why, if we as a human family don't shift what we're doing with our information processing, we could easily destroy life on Earth. It relates to self-organization. So let's keep our minds on that, because soon we're going to see how modern culture gets us to construct a sense of self that may actually be wrong. And not only wrong, it may be so embedded in who we think we are that we don't even know it is taking us over individually and collectively and actually killing us.
In the 1990s, we began to see an even more extreme kind of memory problem. Some patients were going into therapy with one problem, maybe they had depression, eating disorder, and they were coming out of therapy with a different problem. Extreme memories for horrific brutalization, sometimes in satanic rituals, sometimes involving really bizarre and unusual elements. One woman came out of psychotherapy believing that she'd endured years of ritualistic abuse, where she was forced into a pregnancy and that the baby was cut from her belly. But there were no physical scars or any kind of physical evidence that could have supported her story. And when I began looking into these cases, I was wondering, where do these bizarre memories come from? And what I found is that most of these situations involved some particular form of psychotherapy. And so I asked, were some of the things going on in this psychotherapy, like the imagination exercises, or dream interpretation, or in some cases hypnosis, or in some cases exposure to false information, were these leading these patients to develop these very bizarre, unlikely memories? And I designed some experiments to try to study the processes that were being used in this psychotherapy so I could study the development of these very rich false memories. In one of the first studies we did, we used suggestion, a method inspired by the psychotherapy we saw in these cases. We used this kind of suggestion and planted a false memory that when you were a kid, 5 or 6 years old, you were lost in a shopping mall. You were frightened, you were crying, you were ultimately rescued by an elderly person and reunited with the family. And we succeeded in planting this memory in the minds of about a quarter of our subjects. And you might be thinking, well, that's not particularly stressful. But we and other investigators have planted rich false memories of things that were much more unusual and much more stressful. So in a study done in Tennessee, researchers planted the false memory that when you were a kid, you nearly drowned and had to be rescued by a lifeguard. And in a study done in Canada, researchers planted the false memory that when you were a kid, something as awful as being attacked by a vicious animal happened to you, succeeding with about half of their subjects. And in a study done in Italy, researchers planted the false memory when you were a kid, you witnessed demonic possession. I do want to add that it might seem like we are traumatizing these experimental subjects in the name of science, but our studies have gone through thorough evaluation by research ethics boards that have made the decision that the temporary discomfort that some of these subjects might experience in these studies is outweighed by the importance of this problem for understanding memory processes and the abuse of memory that is going on in some places in the world.
That may actually be a construction, and the fantastic thing about it being a construction is we can deconstruct it and liberate a constructed view of the self that may be actually more accurate and more helpful to human life and life on this planet. So let's see how that would work. When you look at this conduition and construction, and you study all sorts of things, and this is in all the different books I write about this subject, so this is just a simple summary slide, it turns out that you can say what optimal self-organization is. So if one facet of the mind is a self-organizing process, you can then ask, how do you get optimal self-organization, which has 5 features. It's flexible, spells the word faces, by the way, flexible, adaptive. It has the mathematical quality of coherence, which is resilience over time. It's energized, and it's stable. This faces flow is like the flow of harmony. There's a huge amount of science behind that, but we're just going to get to the take-home message, which is if you are not doing what's necessary to promote optimal self-organization, which I'll have you consider is happening now on this planet, then what happens to the individual, to the relationship you have one-on-one, or to the family, or to the community, or to the nation, or to the entire ecosphere, is you get chaos and you get rigidity. This is straight out of math. Complex systems which don't allow optimal self-organization move towards chaos or rigidity.
If I plant a false memory in your mind, does it have repercussions? Does it affect your later thoughts, your later behaviors? Our first study planted a false memory that you got sick as a child, eating certain foods, hard-boiled eggs, dill pickles, strawberry ice cream, and we found that once we planted this false memory, people didn't want to eat the foods as much at an outdoor picnic. The false memories aren't necessarily bad or unpleasant. If we planted a warm, fuzzy memory involving a healthy food like asparagus, we could get people to want to eat asparagus more. And so what these studies are showing is that you can plant false memories and they have repercussions that affect behavior long after the memories take hold. Well, along with this ability to plant memories and control behavior, obviously comes some important ethical issues. Like, when should we use this mind technology? And should we ever ban its use? Therapists can't ethically plant false memories in the mind of their patients, even if it would help the patient. But there's nothing to stop a parent from trying this out on their overweight or obese teenager.
Then you can say the natural question is, well, then how do I promote optimal self-organization? How do I develop that flexible, adaptive, resilient, coherent way of being that's energized and stable? And it turns out there's an answer. And the answer is you differentiate and you link. And in common English terms, we'll use the term integration for how you optimize self-organization. So integration is defined in the way we're going to use it as the linkage of differentiated parts. So whether we look inside your brain and your head and study every psychiatric disorder that's ever been studied, the one finding that's been found across every disorder is impaired integration. If we look in my field, attachment research, at relationships that don't promote well-being, like with developmental trauma, it's impaired relational integration. And what does that do to the brain? It impairs the growth of integration in the brain. Why does that matter? Because integration in the brain and the whole body, in fact, is the basis for every form of regulation we have, regulating emotion, mood, affect, the expression of emotion, thought, behavior. So this graph, as simple as it is, actually explains your individual life with your mind as a self-organizing process and the life of the planet. Because when we don't honor the differentiated needs of different species of living organisms on this planet, and we assert a differentiated right to treat Earth like a trash can, what results is a chaotic world that we're experiencing right now. It's called a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. That's a term that's used in the military, it's used in the media. The VUCA world we're in right now, what I want to suggest to you, is coming because the human brain has a vulnerability to think that it's separate from the rest of living organisms. It's like I once attended a quantum physics think tank, we'll get into that in a moment, and the first presenter put up a slide, quantum physics has demonstrated that the world is profoundly interconnected. The real question is, what's wrong with the human mind that thinks it's not? And that's pretty funny and incredibly sad. And it's the issue of the quiz we're going to get into in a moment, what's the self? Because you may say, well, of course, the self that's me is sitting in this chair. Or the self that's Dan is up here on stage. And that view is so common and so misguided. Energy and information flow, if that's where the self is coming from, I'll suggest to you, is not limited by skull or skin. And yet we use the skin as a defining feature of who we are. And that is a toxic lie that is creating misery in humanity and misery for other living beings. And it's something we can do something about. Why is love and awareness so overlapping? That's a grammatical error. Let's do it again. Why? Why is love and awareness, why are they so overlapping? Why is there so much overlap? So let's take a look at the next slide. Here is a quick quantum course in what I think is going on. So I was asked to speak at a conference as just a co-faculty member with 150 quantum physicists and mathematicians and other types of physicists. And I kept on asking them in this week we spent together, what is energy? Because if the mind is an emergent property of energy, then we ought to go to the scientists who study energy, right? Makes sense. And they said, well, energy isn't really something, it's a lot of different things. I said, but why do you use the word energy? And here's what they said. Energy is the movement from possibility to actuality. If we don't question that word self, we are in for deep, deep trouble. Human potential can be tapped when you get to this plane of possibility. When you drop out of those plateaus of a separate self, it's a win-win-win situation all around. Love and kindness are the strongest way of being as a human being we can have on this planet.